There's no way you're interviewing that psycho, Tracy screamed. His cult's been linked to 4 murders in the last month. That's exactly why I have to do this now, I said. If I can get him before he's arrested, and he actually shows up to the meeting, we could crack 100,000 views easily. I'm telling you, talking to Jim Manx could be our ticket out of obscurity. Her green eyes glinted with a mix of fear and rage. Damn it, Dave. I don't care if we get 1 million views. Manx is dangerous. Trust me, I said. You won't have to worry about me getting hurt. I'll be taking this with me. I pulled up my shirt to reveal my holstered Glock 42. I'd gotten my concealed carry license a few months back, when the conspiracy theorist I was interviewing pulled a switchblade on me. Now I never do an interview without it. I continued. If he tries anything crazy, and I don't think he will, I'll be perfectly safe. She rolled her eyes. You're such a guy. That's not what I meant by dangerous. He gets into people's heads, you know. People who talk to him for too long get changed. Now it was my turn to roll my eyes. The news had spent the past few weeks hyping Jim Manx up to be quite the manipulator. This was due to his almost supernatural ability to make seemingly normal people abandon their old lives and join his cult. Chuckling, I said, if you're worried about me getting converted, then trust me, there's no need. You'd have to be crazy to believe a word out of his mouth. What about that journalist who talked to him last fall? I swallowed. The journalist she was referring to was Trent Lowndes, a writer for our local paper who tried to interview Manx for a piece he was doing. The reason I say tried is because the interview ended abruptly an hour in. According to his wife, Lowndes drove home, tore the interview notes to shreds, and went straight to his bedroom, refusing to talk about it. He didn't come down when his wife called him for dinner, and when she went up to check on him, she found his body. He'd hung himself with a belt. The image caused a flutter of trepidation at my upcoming meeting with Manx, but I quickly squashed the feeling. Listen, I said. It's terrible what happened to Lowndes. It really is, but it's ridiculous to think that Manx is the reason he did that. Then why did he do it? She fired back. She began ticking items on her fingers. He had plenty of friends, a great career, and no history of mental health. I don't know, I said, throwing my hands up in exasperation. But you don't either. Christ, Tracy, if you're honestly buying into these nutjob conspiracies, you're just as crazy as Manx. She flinched at that, and I immediately tried to take it back. Hey, I didn't mean... Don't bother, she said sharply. Listen, I'm just saying, we know why you're doing the interview. But why is he doing it? I had to admit, she had a point. Manx had refused countless interview requests for months, only to randomly reach out to my obscure little podcast. It didn't add up. What if he just doesn't trust the big news outside to hear him out? I had tried to sound confident, but the words came out like a question. Tracy didn't look convinced, turning away from me and crossing her arms. I don't know, I still don't like it. I hugged her from behind, resting my chin on her shoulder, putting on my best reassuring boyfriend voice. I said, it's only an hour-long interview. How much harm can he do in 60 minutes? I'll be fine. I hope you're right. She turned around, leaned into me, and we kissed, not knowing it would be our last time. It was about half an hour later when I pulled into the diner's dirty parking lot. Mel's was written in sloppy cursive on a sign that was slightly askew. After pushing through the smudged glass doors, I began scanning the area for any signs of Jim Manx. It didn't take long. The golden moon necklace he always wore made him easy enough to spot. You couldn't be one of his followers without having one. The first thing I noticed about him was the beard, scraggly enough to be a pirate's. The second thing I noticed was his bloodshot eyes. I prayed to God it was just weed. From the articles I'd read, he could get pretty erratic when he was on crack. I gave him a single nod when I finally caught his eye. In response, he raised a skeletal arm to wave at me, wiggling his bony fingers as he did. As I slowly navigated through the sea of tables and waitresses, he never broke eye contact. After finally reaching him, I stuck out a hand for him to shake. "Hi, Mr. Manx," I said, trying hard to sound professional. "Thanks again for agreeing to meet with me." He gave a thin smile and shook my hand for a little too long. "The pleasure is all mine. I'm just glad to spread the good word." Manx spoke far more eloquently than I expected. The man's speech was stiff and a bit choppy, but it was a far cry from the slurred, incoherent rambling I'd anticipated. I began pulling various microphones and cables out of my bag and setting them up. "Sorry about being late, the traffic." He cut me off, finishing my sentence for me. "The traffic on Maple Avenue was a killer." I coughed awkwardly. Yeah, that's right." A few moments later, everything was set up, and I hit the record button. I always took care to flatter my guests during the intro. It makes them more willing to talk. "I'm sitting here today with the leader of a revolutionary new sect of Seventh-day Adventism that's been growing steadily for the past few months. They call themselves the Children of Enoch and are pushing nearly 100 members as of today. If you haven't guessed by now, my guest is Jim Manx. How are you doing today?" Manx gave another of his thin-lipped smiles. "Very well, thank you." "That's great to hear. Let's start off by addressing the elephant in the room. You garnered local media attention last month when you claimed to be the reincarnated Son of God. Do you still stand by that statement?" "Of course." His answer came without a shred of hesitation. I probed to see how far his delusion went. "So, do you believe you're immortal?" No. You see, I've given myself human form to facilitate my sacrifice." I raised an eyebrow. "Sacrifice?" "Yes. Just like Jesus before me, I will die at the hands of the enemy to bring peace to the world." I studied his eyes for any sign of self-awareness, but found none. He looked so genuine, I firmly believed he would have passed a lie detector. "You talk about peace, but isn't it true you've called for war against unbelievers?" He chuckled quietly. It was a harsh sound without a shred of humor. "I guess your research didn't go beyond my Wikipedia page, huh?" I was taken aback. "Is something wrong?" He leaned in closer, speaking slowly and deliberately. "That is the belief of a small, radical subset of my followers, not me. The news won't tell you that, though. They're too busy to be making me out as some kind of monster." I leaned back in my seat and cleared my throat. "And are you talking about the Trevor family murders?" "Damn right. They keep insisting that I'm somehow accountable for that." I tried to keep the disgust from leaking into my voice. "Mr. Manx, you must know by now that the prime suspect for the crime is one of your followers." His eyes narrowed. "I never forced him to do anything. I gave you humans free will, but I can't control how you use it." "You called her a demon at least 5 different times. In one speech, you called Sharon Trevor and the rest of her family a satanic force that needed to be stopped." He didn't break eye contact. "And I stand by that. She was tarnishing our reputation with her disgusting lies." I noticed my hand balled into a fist and released it. "Don't you think it's rhetoric like that that causes your followers to become violent? I mean, for God's sake." Manx suddenly slammed his hands on the table, nearly giving me a heart attack. His eyes had ignited into hot embers. "Don't you dare use my name in vain, boy." My hand twitched over my holstered pistol. However, instead of lunging at me with a butter knife, he took a deep breath and leaned back into his seat, straightening his dark, greasy hair. "You clearly don't have faith," he said, It'll take more than words to convince you. He glanced at his watch and began studying the diner. And what does that mean? Do you believe in karma, David? Alarm bells sounded in my head. I'd been trying not to stray too far from the interview format. Tracy wouldn't like me giving Manx details about myself. We really should get back on topic. We can change the subject if you like. No, I actually wouldn't like. Answer the question or I'm walking out. An image of Trent Lowndes flashed in my head, rope around his neck, toes dangling a few feet off the ground. Could letting Manx get in my head really make me end up like that? I studied Manx, his stained button-down shirt, his tattered dress shoes, and decided I was being stupid. Lowndes was just suicidal and unstable. Tracy is just being paranoid. There isn't anything special about Jim Manx. I sighed. No, I don't really believe in karma. Bad people get off scot-free all the time. You're wrong, he said bluntly. No sins go unpunished. I smirked, not bothering to mask my low regard for him. Really? But let me guess, you can't do it when people are watching. I prefer not to, he said slowly. But I think I can make an exception. I raised an eyebrow at this. He discreetly raised a finger, pointing it at someone behind me. You see that man there? Humouring him, I turned around. He wasn't anything special, just a pudgy suburban dad type. He sat at a table on the other side of the building, talking on the phone and sipping a coffee. Yeah, I see him. What about him? Manx's eyes had become narrow and predatory, like a wolf on the hunt. He spent today soaking up the booze from a 3-day bender. Right now, he's spinning a tale to his wife about being on a business trip. Manx tapped the table once with a bony finger, and the man instantly knocked over his cup of coffee, spilling it all over his lap. As the man belted out a scream of curses, I noticed Manx mouthing the words with him perfectly. Jesus Christ. Hold on, Betty. Hold on. I said, yeah, I'll just call you back after I handle something. I was dumbstruck. There was no way Manx had just done that, right? It had to be some kind of insane coincidence. Heh, I said. Nice parlour trick, but I came here for an interview. I began unplugging my microphones. Manx sighed as if I was the one being unreasonable. Very well. How about her? A thin woman in her early 30s was walking past our table towards the bathroom. She had short blonde hair that framed sky-blue eyes. Insider trading. She's made almost $10,000 from it in just under a year. His words were practically dripping with disgust. Again, he tapped the table. I watched in horror as her heels snapped without warning, sending her toppling over. She clipped her head on the corner of a table with a sickening thud and fell in a heap on the floor. People immediately swarmed around her to help. To my relief, she shakily pushed herself to her feet, a small red streak on her forehead where she'd hit her head. With the assistance of a few good Samaritans, she made her way to the door, presumably to drive to the hospital. I turned to Manx, eyes wide. You couldn't have. He just stared back at me with an expression that was almost bored. Do you still have doubts? Well, of course I do. You had to notice her broken heel beforehand or something. I saw the faintest hint of irritation in his eyes. Why is your heart so hard? What do you want me to do? I tried to think of a curveball he couldn't possibly have accounted for. Then I had an idea. Okay, God. How about me? He seemed taken aback. What? I smiled. Go on, man. If all that wasn't just some big setup, then you should be able to do the same thing to me no problem. For the first time since I sat down, he looked flustered. I can't. Oh, really? Why not? He broke my gaze. You haven't sinned. I chuckled. I thought you were our almighty Lord. There's got to be some way for you to do it, right? I mean, I guess there is. I pressed him. And what's that? He sighed heavily. I would need your explicit permission. It's usually a handshake, but... Before he'd even finished speaking, I grabbed his hand and shook it. I wanted to laugh at the look of surprise on his face. There, I said. Now go on, God. No more excuses. Work your magic. He just looked down at his feet. I chuckled as I packed up the rest of my equipment. Crazy bastard, I muttered. Throwing my bag over my shoulder, I got up from the table to leave, but ran into someone. I was about to push past him, then I noticed the jet black police uniform. Sir, are you Dave Ellington? Yeah? What's this about? Am I in trouble? The officer fidgeted with his wedding ring and looked at the ground. We should probably talk somewhere more private. There's been an accident. I took a step back. What kind of accident? What happened? He spoke quietly and slow. We really should talk outside. It's about your girlfriend, Tracy Morgan. Tracy? What happened to her? What's wrong? He took a deep breath. Tracy was T-boned by a drunk driver a few blocks over. My breathing began to get shallow. No, that's not true. You're wrong. I noticed Manks whispering to himself, just like he'd done with the man on the phone. As the officer spoke, Manks mouthed the words with him in perfect unison. She was rushed to the hospital, but died on the way there. This can't be true, I thought. She's going to walk through the door at any moment and say everything's all right. But I knew it wasn't true. Grief vibrated in my chest like the string of a harp. Then I saw Manks. He was sitting at his booth smiling. In an instant, the grief ignited into red-hot rage. I raised a shaky finger at him. What the hell did you do? His eyes flashed with humor. Exactly what we agreed on. We shook hands, remember? I squeezed my eyes shut, searching the darkness for answers. I couldn't deny it any longer. Manx wasn't human, but he sure as hell wasn't God. God doesn't revel in chaos. God isn't restricted to shady handshake deals. Then everything snapped into place, like a Rubik's Cube. It was so obvious, I couldn't believe I hadn't realized it sooner. I slowly unholstered my pistol and pointed it at him. The diner erupted into horrified screams and shouts. I was vaguely aware of the officer demanding I lower the weapon, but I paid him no mind. I wanted to see Manx's eyes fill with fear, but he wouldn't give me the satisfaction. He just kept that same amused grin, as if I had pointed a water gun at him. I gritted my teeth and tried to find the strength to lower the gun. I almost did, but then Tracy's green eyes flashed in my mind. The gun went off, once, then twice. I kept pulling the trigger. Even after there were no more bullets left, I dropped it and collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down my face. I sat there for a long while, sobs racking my body. That's when I heard it. A gasp. A familiar gasp. A gasp that shouldn't have been possible. I whipped around and there she was. Tracy stood in the doorway, staring down at me. My jaw hung open. But what about the crash? She looked bewildered. What crash? Oh my God, did he tell you that? I jumped up to hug her, but she recoiled from my touch. I realised my skin was dotted with blood and grit. "Dave," she shrieked. "What the hell did he tell you? What did you do?" My words came out frantic and disorganised. "No, you don't get it. I had to do it. He made things happen just by pointing. He hurt you. Or at least he was going to. I had to." I suddenly realised I'd been backing her into a corner. She was looking at me like how you might a rabid dog. Tracy gulped. "Dave, you sound—" The word crazy hung in the air, unsaid. But how could have Manx caused all those accidents? I turned back to what was left of him. 3 people sat weeping over his body. I immediately recognised one of them as the police officer from before. Upon closer inspection, I realised the other 2 people were the man who spilled his coffee and the tall blonde woman who'd fallen. And around all 3 of their necks were golden moon necklaces, just like Manx. They'd been his followers the whole time. Everything Manx had shown me had been set up and planned out from the start. But why the hell would he do this? Who would orchestrate his own death like this? Manx's own words rang out in my mind. "Just like Jesus before me, I will die at the hands of the enemy to bring peace to the world." I buried my head in my hands, hiding from the shame of what I'd done. I had let Manx use me like a pawn. Before, he was a nobody, just some raving lunatic. But now, thanks to me, Manx would be seen as a tragic hero. That's when I felt the red-hot sting of a taser. My body convulsed, my muscles seized, and for the second time that day, I collapsed to the floor. In the end, I was sentenced, rather unsurprisingly, to life in prison. If I'm lucky, I'll be eligible for parole sometime in 2075. Boredom is unbearable here. The only solace is that we're allowed to use the internet for an hour a week. Yesterday, during my hour of rec time, I caught a story on the local news about the children of Enoch. Manx had been claiming he'd die. Recruitment is at an all-time high. When I'm lying on my bunk, waiting for sleep to take me, I think about a lot of things. But my mind keeps wandering back to one question. Who was the real crazy one? Me or Manx?
Hello listeners, if you enjoyed this story, please check out the author in the description. For more content, leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more sinister readings.